Caleb treated his divorce like a transaction he had won, celebrating with his mistress before the ink on the settlement was even dry. He thought stripping Sarah of every penny was the ultimate victory, but his arrogance blinded him to a twist of fate sitting in the mailbox. 20 minutes after he walked out of the courtroom, Sarah opened a letter that reversed their fortunes entirely. By the time Caleb realized the magnitude of what he had abandoned, his premature celebration had already turned into a permanent downfall. The fluorescent lights of the conference room at Harrison, Ford & Associates buzzed with a sound that Sarah felt in her teeth. It was a low, irritating hum, the perfect soundtrack for the worst day of her life. Across the mahogany table sat Caleb. He wasn't looking at her. He was checking his watch, a Rolex Submariner she had saved for 3 years to buy him for his 30th birthday. He was tapping the crystal face, impatient, as if dissolving a 10-year marriage was an inconvenience, like a long line at the drive-thru. "Can we speed this up?" Caleb said, his voice smooth, lacking any shred of the warmth it held when they promised "till death do us part" in that small chapel in Charleston. "I have a flight to catch at 4. Sarah looked down at her hands. They were trembling. She clasped them together to stop the shaking. She wore her old navy blazer, the one with the fraying cuff. She knew she looked tired. She felt erased. Mr. Reynolds, Sarah's lawyer, a kind but overworked public defender named Arthur Higgins, sighed. "We are just finalizing the division of assets. As stated, you are retaining the house in Scarsdale, the 2022 Audi, and the joint savings account." "Because I paid for them," Caleb shot back, flashing a charming, predatory smile at the mediator. "Let's be real. Sarah hasn't worked a real job since 2018. She's been finding herself." The insult landed exactly where he intended. Sarah had quit her marketing job to care for Caleb's mother when she got dementia. She had spent 3 years wiping drool, changing sheets, and being screamed at by a woman who didn't recognize her, all so Caleb could focus on his career as a tech consultant. When his mother died, Caleb didn't thank her. He told her she had let herself go and that she had lost her ambition. "I'm signing," Sarah whispered. Her voice was brittle. "Sarah, you don't have to agree to the clause about the alimony cap," Arthur whispered back, concerned. "It's practically nothing. You'll be struggling to make rent." "I just want out, Arthur," she said, tears finally pricking her eyes. "I want him gone." She grabbed the pen. It was a heavy, expensive Mont Blanc that belonged to the firm. It felt alien in her hand. She scribbled Sarah J. Reynolds. Then she paused. She looked at Caleb. He was texting. He was smiling at his phone. She finished the signature, pushed the paper across the table, and stood up. "Done," she said. Caleb finally looked up. He didn't look sad. He looked relieved. He looked like a man who had just dropped a heavy bag of trash at the curb. "Great," Caleb said, signing his name with a flourish. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, an Italian cut that cost more than Sarah's car. "Well, Sarah, good luck. I'd say keep in touch, but—" He shrugged, offering a pitying grimace. "You know." He didn't even wait for the mediator to dismiss them. He turned on his heel and walked out the glass doors. Sarah watched him go. Through the glass, she saw him pull his phone out again. He brought it to his ear. "It's done, babe," she heard him say, his voice muffled but audible. "I'm free, yeah. Meet me at Teterboro. We're going to St. Bart's tonight." Sarah felt the floor tilt. St. Bart's. He had told her for years they couldn't afford a vacation. "Mrs. Reynolds?" The mediator asked gently. "Are you all right?" "It's Ms. Jenkins now," Sarah said, her voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "It's just Sarah Jenkins." She walked out of the office and into the biting cold of a November afternoon in Chicago. She had $400 in her checking account, a 2014 Honda Civic that needed new brakes, and nowhere to go but a studio apartment she had rented on the outskirts of the city. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, and screamed until her throat tasted like blood. She didn't know that 3 miles away, a courier was currently trying to deliver a certified package to her old address, the house Caleb had just kicked her out of. The private jet smelled of new leather and expensive citrus cologne. Caleb Reynolds stretched his legs out, kicking off his loafers. He held a crystal flute of Dom Perignon, watching the bubbles rise. Across from him sat Jessica. context, she was 24, a fitness influencer with 500,000 followers on Instagram and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. She was everything Sarah wasn't: polished, demanding, and obsessed with status. So, she didn't fight for the house? Jessica asked, looking at her reflection in the window. She didn't fight for anything, Caleb scoffed, taking a sip. Sarah is passive. She's a doormat. That's why I had to leave. I need a partner who challenges me. Someone on my level. You're so bad, Jessica giggled, leaning over to tap his nose. But you're mine now. 100%, Caleb said. He felt a surge of adrenaline. He had pulled off the perfect exit. He had hidden his end-of-year bonus, a massive $150,000 commission, in an offshore account just months before the filing. Sarah's cheap lawyer hadn't even looked for it. He had the house, the car, the freedom, and the girl. He pulled out his phone to check his emails. A notification popped up from his smart home security system. Motion detected at front porch, 4:15 p.m. He clicked the live feed. He saw a FedEx delivery man standing at the door of the Scarsdale house. The man rang the bell, waited, and then knocked. "Who is it?" Jessica asked, looking over his shoulder. "Just a delivery guy," Caleb said. "Probably one of Sarah's last Amazon packages. Sad. She probably ordered bulk tissues." On the screen, the delivery driver looked at the scanner, frowned, and then typed something. He didn't leave the package. It was a signature-required envelope. He stuck a "sorry we missed you" note on the door and walked back to the truck. "Whatever," Caleb closed the app. "I'll deal with it when we get back next week, or I'll just throw it out." "Cheers to that," Jessica said, clinking her glass against his. The jet engines roared to life. Caleb looked out at the tarmac, feeling like the king of the world. He had no idea that the envelope the driver had just taken away contained the legal transfer documents for the estate of Archibald Sterling. Archibald Sterling was Sarah's great-uncle on her father's side, a man the family rarely spoke of because he was a recluse who lived in a dilapidated mansion in the Hudson Valley. Everyone assumed he was broke, a hoarder of old newspapers and cats. Caleb had met him once, at a funeral 7 years ago. Caleb had mocked the old man's tweed jacket and the way he smelled of mothballs. Sarah, however, had spent the entire afternoon sitting with Archibald, listening to his stories about the copper mining industry in the 1960s. She had sent him Christmas cards every year. She had sent him cookies. Archibald had died 2 weeks ago. He had no children. He had no living siblings. And unbeknownst to everyone, Archibald Sterling hadn't been broke. He had been the majority shareholder of Sterling Copper, a company that had quietly been acquired by a global conglomerate 3 months prior for a staggering sum. Caleb Reynolds was flying to St. Bart's to spend $20,000 he thought was a fortune. Meanwhile, on the ground below him, his ex-wife was currently the sole beneficiary of an estate valued at $480 million. Sarah sat on the floor of her new apartment. It was grim. The radiator hissed and clanked, and there was a water stain on the ceiling that looked suspiciously like a grimacing face. She was eating instant noodles, scrolling through her phone. She knew she shouldn't do it, but she couldn't help herself. She opened Instagram. There it was. Jessica's story. "Off to paradise with my love. New beginnings, soulmate, Sparts." The photo showed their intertwined hands holding champagne glasses. Sarah recognized Caleb's watch. She felt a physical blow to her stomach, a nausea so intense she had to put the noodles down. Ding dong. The doorbell made her jump. It was a harsh, buzzing sound. Sarah wiped her eyes and stood up. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door to find a young man in a brown uniform holding a flat, rigid cardboard envelope. "Sarah Jenkins?" "Yes." "I tried your old address in Scarsdale," the driver said, looking breathless. "The neighbor, Mrs. Gable, told me you moved here. I'm not really supposed to reroute like this without a request, but it looked important. Legal stuff." "Thank you," Sarah said, bewildered. She signed the digital pad. She took the envelope inside. It was heavy. The return address was Blackwood and Thorne, attorneys at law. She sat back down on the floor. She used her thumbnail to slit the tape. Inside was a thick stack of papers bound in a blue folder. On top was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was shaky, spider-like. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, I have finally kicked the bucket. I know we didn't see each other often, but you were the only one in that nest of vipers who ever looked at me like I was a human being, not a wallet or a burden. You listened to me. You sent me oatmeal raisin cookies, even when I didn't write back. You have a good heart, a heart too good for that husband of yours. Yes, I saw how he looked at you. I saw how he diminished you. I hope this gift gives you the freedom to be whoever you want to be. Don't let the money change you, Sarah, but do let it change your circumstances. Your loving Uncle Archie. Sarah frowned. Money. Uncle Archie lived in a house that was falling down. She turned the page to the official executor's letter. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon. Last will and testament. Sole beneficiary. Liquidation of assets. She stopped. She blinked. She rubbed her eyes and looked again. Net distributable assets, $482,500,000 USD. Sarah stopped breathing. The room went silent. The hissing radiator faded away. 482 million. She dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor. She stared at it as if it were a radioactive isotope. This had to be a joke. A cruel prank Caleb was playing on her. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. Blackwood and Thorne. "Good afternoon, Blackwood and Thorne," a receptionist answered. "Hi, my name is Sarah Jenkins. I just received a package regarding Archibald Sterling." The tone on the other end changed instantly. It went from professional to reverent. "Oh, Miss Jenkins, we have been trying to reach you. Mr. Blackwood is eager to speak with you. Please hold for 1 moment." 30 seconds later, a deep, gravelly voice came on the line. "Ms. Jenkins, Robert Blackwood here. My deepest condolences for your loss." "Is this real?" Sarah blurted out. "The number? Is it real?" "It is very real, Ms. Jenkins," Blackwood said gently. "Archibald was a very private, very brilliant investor. The funds are currently held in a trust awaiting your signature. We can wire an advance of $5 million to your account by tomorrow morning if you need immediate liquidity." Sarah didn't speak. She looked around her studio apartment. She looked at the instant noodles. She looked at the water stain on the ceiling. "Ms. Jenkins." "I'm here," she whispered. "I also have instructions regarding the disclosure of these assets," Blackwood continued. "Since your divorce was finalized yesterday, and I checked the court records myself this morning, these assets are considered post-marital inheritance. Your ex-husband is entitled to absolutely nothing. Zero. This is entirely yours." Sarah let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 10 years. "Mr. Blackwood?" "Yes?" "I don't want the advance wired to my current bank," Sarah said, her voice suddenly steady, a steel spine forming where there used to be fear. "I'm going to open a new account, and I want to keep this quiet. I don't want anyone to know. Not yet. Discretion is our specialty," Blackwood said. Sarah hung up. She walked over to the window and looked out at the grey city. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. It wasn't a smile of happiness, exactly. It was the smile of a chess player who just realized their opponent had left their king completely unguarded. Caleb was in St. Bart's, drinking champagne, thinking he had won. Let him celebrate, Sarah thought. Let him have his week. She picked up the instant noodles and threw them in the trash. Then she put on her coat. She was going to buy a steak. She was going to buy a bottle of wine that cost more than $12, and then she was going to plan. The first thing Sarah bought wasn't a car or a house. It was silence. 3 days after the phone call with Robert Blackwood, Sarah sat in a glass-walled office on the 44th floor of a building in downtown Chicago. She was wearing her best suit, but surrounded by the quiet luxury of the Blackwood and Thorne firm, she felt like she was wearing a costume. Across from her sat a team of 4 people. Robert Blackwood, the attorney, Elena Rostova, no, not Elena. Let's use Vivian, a forensic accountant, James Sterling, a distant cousin she didn't know existed who managed the family trust, and Dr. Aris Thorne, a reputation manager. "The funds have cleared," Robert said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the obsidian desk. "The taxes have been pre-calculated and set aside in the escrow. What you see there is your liquid operating capital." Sarah looked at the number. It was no longer a terrifying abstraction. It was a weapon. "Caleb doesn't know," Sarah said softly, "and I want to keep it that way. If he finds out I have this money, he will try to sue. He'll claim he contributed to my emotional stability, or he'll try to reopen the settlement based on fraud, claiming I knew about the inheritance before the signing. He can try, Robert said with a shark-like grin, but the timeline is ironclad. However, you are right, silence is power. We suggest setting up a blind trust. The Phoenix Trust. All your purchases, real estate, vehicles, investments will be made through this entity. Your name won't appear on a single deed. Do it, Sarah said, and I want to buy something specific, but not yet. First, I need to fix this. She gestured to herself. I look like a woman who just got divorced. I look like a victim. Dr. Thorne, the reputation manager, leaned forward. He was an impeccably dressed man with silver hair. Miss Jenkins, wealth is not just about what you buy. It is about how you occupy space. You have spent 10 years shrinking yourself to fit into a small man's life. It is time to expand. The next 6 weeks were a blur of painful, necessary evolution. Sarah moved out of the studio apartment and into the presidential suite of the Langham Hotel. She told the few friends she kept in contact with that she had landed a consulting gig with a remote firm. It was a half-truth. She was consulting on the reconstruction of her own life. She hired a personal trainer, a former Marine named Jax, who didn't care about her sob story. He cared about her deadlift. Every morning at 5 a.m., Sarah was in the gym, pushing weighted sleds until her lungs burned. With every pound she lifted, she imagined she was pushing Caleb off her chest. The physical strength began to seep into her mental state. She stopped walking with her shoulders hunched. She started making eye contact with strangers. Then came the wardrobe. She didn't go to the flashy stores with big logos. She hired a private stylist, a woman named Chloe who had dressed royalty. No logos, Sarah instructed Chloe as they stood in a private showroom in New York. I don't want people to know I have money because I'm wearing a brand name. I want them to know I have money because the clothes fit so perfectly they look like a second skin. They replaced her polyester blends with cashmere, silk, and structured wool. They cut her hair, the long, frizzy ponytail Caleb had always insisted she keep because he liked long hair on girls, was chopped into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that highlighted her jawline. She dyed it a rich, dark chocolate. When she looked in the mirror 6 weeks later, the woman staring back wasn't Sarah the housewife. It was someone dangerous. But the most important transformation happened in the boardroom. Sarah began attending crash courses on finance and business management. She spent her nights reading about the companies her uncle had invested in. She realized she wasn't just rich, she was influential. The Phoenix Trust held voting shares in 3 major tech firms, a pharmaceutical company, and Harrison, Ford and Associates, the consulting firm where Caleb worked. Sarah sat in her suite one evening, a glass of vintage Pinot Noir in hand, looking at the corporate structure of Caleb's company. "Robert," she said into the phone. "Yes, Miss Jenkins. The Harrison, Ford and Associates annual shareholder gala is coming up in 2 weeks. The winter solstice ball. It's the event where they announce the new partners." "I believe so. Caleb is up for partner this year, isn't he?" "He is," Sarah said, her voice cool. "He's been working toward it for 5 years. He needs to bring in a whale client to secure the promotion. I see here that the Phoenix Trust owns 12% of the firm's stock through a subsidiary." "That is correct. You are technically a silent majority owner." "I don't want to be silent anymore," Sarah said. "Get me an invitation, not as Sarah Jenkins, as the representative of the Phoenix Trust, and I want a table, front and center." "Understood. Shall I arrange security?" "Yes, and Robert." "Yes. Make sure Caleb is sitting at the table next to mine." Caleb Reynolds adjusted his bow tie in the rear-view mirror of his Audi. He looked tired. The trip to St. Bart's had been expensive. Jessica had insisted on upgrading their flight, then the suite, then the boat rental. He had blown through $40,000 in 10 days. It was fine, he told himself. He was about to make partner. Once he got that promotion, his base salary would double, and the bonuses would cover the debt he was currently racking up on his Amex Platinum. But things at home weren't the paradise he expected. Jessica wasn't like Sarah. She didn't cook. She didn't clean. She left wet towels on the bed and complained that the house in Scarsdale was too suburban and smelled like old people. She wanted a condo in the city. "Babe, are you coming?" Jessica whined from the passenger seat. She was wearing a dress that was slightly too revealing for a corporate gala, a plunging red sequin number that looked great on Instagram, but cheap in person. "Yeah, just thinking," Caleb said. "This night is huge, Jess. I need to impress the senior partners. There's a rumor that a representative from the major shareholder group is coming tonight. If I can land a meeting with them, the partnership is mine." They walked into the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton. It was dripping with crystals and gold leaf. The room was filled with Chicago's elite men in tuxedos, women in gowns that cost more than cars. Caleb navigated the room, shaking hands, flashing his winning smile, but he felt a cold sweat on his back. His boss, Mr. Harrison, had pulled him aside earlier that day. "Numbers are down this quarter, Reynolds," Harrison had said. "We need a win. If you don't close a big account soon, we might have to rethink the partnership track." Caleb grabbed a glass of champagne, downing it quickly. He needed liquid courage. "Let's find our table," Caleb said, guiding Jessica by the elbow. They were seated at table 12. It was a good table, but not the best. The best table was table 1, right in front of the stage. It was currently empty, reserved with a simple placard, "The Phoenix Trust." "Who are they?" Jessica asked, chewing her gum loudly. "The money," Caleb muttered. "The people who own us." The lights dimmed. The CEO took the stage for the opening remarks. Caleb tuned him out, his eyes scanning the room for potential clients. Then, the doors at the back of the room opened. A hush fell over the crowd. It started at the back and rippled forward like a wave. Heads turned. Whispers broke out. Walking down the center aisle was a woman. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet, off the shoulder, with a slit that revealed a tasteful amount of leg. Around her neck was a diamond choker that caught the light and threw it back with blinding intensity. She walked with a predator's grace, shoulders back, chin high. She was flanked by 2 large men in black suits and a distinguished older man with silver hair, Robert Blackwood. Caleb squinted. The woman looked familiar. The walk. He knew that stride. But this woman was radiating power. She looked like a movie star. She looked like royalty. As she passed table 12, the woman turned her head. Her eyes locked with Caleb's. For a second, Caleb's brain short-circuited. He knew those brown eyes. He knew the curve of that lip. But it was impossible. "Sarah?" he whispered. Jessica looked up from her phone. "Who?" The woman didn't stop. She offered Caleb a small, almost imperceptible smirk, cold, amused, and utterly dismissing, and continued to table 1. The room watched as the CEO on stage actually stopped his speech to bow his head slightly as she took her seat. Waiters swarmed her table immediately, pouring vintage wine that wasn't being served to anyone else. "No way," Caleb said, his voice trembling. That looked like my ex-wife." Jessica laughed, a harsh barking sound. "That woman, babe, you said your ex-wife wore sweatpants and shopped at Target. That woman is wearing a Vera Wang custom, and that necklace, that's at least $500,000. "I know," Caleb said, feeling like he was going to throw up, but it looked just like her. He couldn't focus for the rest of the dinner. He kept staring at the back of her head. He watched the way the senior partners, the men Caleb was terrified of, approached her table one by one, bowing and scraping, laughing at her jokes. Finally, during the dessert course, Caleb couldn't take it anymore. "I'm going to the bathroom," he told Jessica. He didn't go to the bathroom. He walked toward table 1. He had to know. He approached the table cautiously. A security guard stepped in his path immediately. "Sir, this is a private table," the guard rumbled. "It's okay, Frank," the woman said. Her voice was like smoked honey, richer, deeper than he remembered, but unmistakably hers. She turned in her chair to face him. Up close, the transformation was even more terrifying. Her skin was luminous. Her makeup was flawless. She looked 10 years younger and 10 times wealthier than him. "Hello, Caleb," Sarah said. She didn't stand up. She didn't offer her hand. She just looked at him like he was a waiter who had brought the wrong order. "Sarah?" Caleb choked out. What is this? What are you doing here?" "I'm working," she said calmly, taking a sip of wine. "I'm the managing director of the Phoenix Trust. We own a significant portion of this building, and your company." Caleb's knees nearly buckled. "You? But how? You have no money. I checked the accounts. I took everything." Sarah laughed. It wasn't the nervous, pleasing laugh she used to have. It was a dark, genuine sound of amusement. "You took the crumbs, Caleb. You fought for the scraps on the table because you were too busy looking down to realize the feast was happening above your head." "I don't understand," Caleb stammered. He felt everyone looking at them. "Is this some kind of joke? Are you sleeping with someone? Is that it? You found a sugar daddy?" It was the only explanation his small mind could conjure. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened into flint. "Be careful, Caleb. You're speaking to your boss's boss." She leaned forward, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "And to answer your question, no. I didn't find a man to save me. I found myself. And it turns out I'm very, very expensive." "I want to talk," Caleb demanded, his old aggression flaring up to mask his fear. "We need to talk outside. Now." "I don't think so," Sarah said, checking her diamond watch. "I have a meeting with the board in 5 minutes to discuss the new partnership promotions. I'm reviewing the candidates." She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his slightly frayed collar and the sweat beading on his forehead. "You're looking a little stressed, Caleb. Maybe you're not ready for the added responsibility of a partnership this year. Maybe you need some time to focus on your personal life." Caleb went pale. "You can't do that. I earned this." "Did you?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Or did you just bully your way to the middle? I know how you operate, Caleb. I lived with it for 10 years. But here's the news flash. The lease on my patience expired the day you walked out of that courtroom." She dismissed him with a wave of her hand. "Go back to your table. Go back to your girlfriend. Enjoy the cheesecake. It's on me." "Sarah, please." "Goodbye, Mr. Reynolds," Robert Blackwood interjected firmly, stepping between them. Caleb stood there for a moment, stunned, stripped of his dignity in front of the entire Chicago business elite. He turned and walked back to his table, his legs feeling like lead. When he sat down, Jessica looked at him. "Well? Was it her?" Caleb looked at the woman in the midnight blue dress, holding court at the head table. "No," Caleb whispered, staring into his empty glass. "That's not the woman I married. That's the woman I created." Monday morning at Harrison, Ford and Associates was usually a time of high energy. Phones ringing, deals closing, the smell of expensive coffee wafting through the halls. But when Caleb walked in, the silence was deafening. It wasn't a quiet office, it was a shunned silence. As he walked past the reception desk, the receptionist, a gossipy woman named Brenda, didn't offer her usual flirtatious, "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds." She looked down at her keyboard, her face flushed, pretending to type furiously. Caleb felt the eyes on him. The whispers stopped the moment he turned corners. He reached his office, the corner office he had fought tooth and nail for, and found his keycard didn't work. The little light on the handle blinked an angry red. Access denied. "What the hell?" Caleb muttered, jamming the card in again. "Mr. Reynolds?" Caleb turned. It wasn't his assistant. It was the head of human resources, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, ironically the same last name as his old neighbor, which always annoyed him. Beside her stood 2 security guards. "We need you to come to conference room B," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "My key isn't working," Caleb snapped, trying to regain control. "And I have a client call in 10 minutes. You don't have any client calls, Mr. Reynolds, not anymore." In conference room B, there was no severance package waiting on the table. There was a cardboard box containing his personal effects, a framed photo of him and Jessica on the yacht, his stapler, and a half-empty bottle of cologne. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated," Mrs. Gable said, sliding a document across the table. "On what grounds?" Caleb shouted, slamming his hand down. "I'm a top performer. I brought in the weary account. This is about her, isn't it? My ex-wife?" This is about a conflict of interest and a violation of company ethics, Mrs. Gable said smoothly. We conducted an audit of your expenses over the weekend. It seems you charged a $40,000 trip to St. Bart's to the company credit card under client development. Yet there were no clients in St. Bart's. Only you and a Miss Jessica Miller. Caleb's blood ran cold. He had done that. Everyone did that. It was an unwritten perk of the job. He planned to pay it back, eventually. That's a clerical error, Caleb stammered. It's embezzlement, Mrs. Gable corrected. The new majority shareholder, the Phoenix Trust, has a zero-tolerance policy for financial misconduct. They have instructed us to terminate you with cause. That means no severance, no benefits, and we will be reporting the theft to the authorities if the funds are not repaid within 48 hours. Caleb was escorted out of the building like a criminal. He stood on the sidewalk holding his box, the cold Chicago wind whipping his face. He checked his bank account. $4,200. That was all he had left. The offshore account with his bonus. He had spent half of it on the divorce lawyer and the other half on the down payment for the new Audi. He drove home to Scarsdale, his hands shaking on the wheel. He needed Jessica. Her influencer status brought in some money. Maybe she could help float him until he found a new gig. He walked into the house. It was strangely quiet. "Jess?" he called out. He walked into the bedroom. The closet doors were open. Her clothes were gone. The vanity was bare. No makeup, no perfumes. On the bed was a note written on the back of a takeout menu. "Caleb, my friend sent me a video from the gala. You got owned by your ex-wife? LOL, I can't be with a guy who has that much baggage. Also, your card got declined when I tried to order Uber Eats. Not a good look. Don't call me." J. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed. The house, the big expensive house he had fought Sarah so hard to keep, groaned in the wind. He realized with a sick feeling that the mortgage payment, $6,500, was due in 3 days. He was alone, he was unemployed, and for the first time in his life, he was the one who was afraid. The descent wasn't a slide, it was a freefall. For Caleb Reynolds, the last 3 months had been a brutal education in the physics of hitting rock bottom. It turns out, when you fall from the high rise of corporate arrogance, you don't just land, you shatter. The winter in Chicago had been merciless, a grey, biting season that seemed to mock his personal ruin. After being escorted out of Harrison, Ford and Associates, Caleb had assumed he would bounce back. He was Caleb Reynolds, after all, top biller, charming, handsome. But he quickly learned that in the tight-knit world of high-finance consulting, reputation is currency, and his account was overdrawn. He had applied to 27 firms. He had reached out to headhunters who used to buy him steak dinners just to get him to return their calls. Now, they ghosted him. The few who did reply offered vague excuses, but one, an old drinking buddy named Mark, had been drunk enough to tell him the truth over the phone at 2 a.m. "You're radioactive, Carl. Word is out. You embezzled from a company owned by the Phoenix Trust. Do you know who runs that trust? No one knows the face, but everyone knows the reach. If we hire you, they pull their contracts. You're done in this town. Radioactive." The word echoed in his head as he sat on the floor of the living room in Scarsdale. The house, once his prize, his trophy for winning the divorce, was now just a hollow shell of drywall and debt. He had sold everything. The Audi RS7 went first, sold to a dealership for a fraction of its value just to cover the legal fees he incurred trying to fight his termination. Then went the watches, the Rolex, the Omega, the Breitling. He had pawned them at a strip mall shop, feeling the clerk's pity like a physical slap. Then the furniture. He had watched strangers trample through his home, haggling over his Italian leather sofa, offering him pennies for his designer lamps. He took it all. He had to. The mortgage was a hungry beast that didn't care about his sob story. But it wasn't enough. The foreclosure notice had been taped to his front door like a scarlet letter, notice of default. He had one card left to play, a short sale. It was the ultimate humiliation, selling the house for less than the mortgage balance just to escape the crushing weight of the debt. The bank had agreed. A buyer had been found almost immediately. An all-cash offer, fast close, no inspection. Now, it was closing day. Caleb looked at his phone, 11:45 a.m. He had 15 minutes until the new owners arrived to sign the final papers and take possession. The house was freezing. He had turned the heat down to 50 degrees to save money on the final utility bill. He pulled his coat tighter around himself. It was a cashmere blend, one of the few nice things he had kept, but it was stained at the cuff and smelled faintly of the cheap motel room where he had been sleeping for the past week. "Caleb, cheer up, buddy. Today is a fresh start," Lisa, his realtor, clattered into the room. She was wearing a bright yellow blazer that hurt his eyes. She was trying too hard. She knew his situation. She knew he was walking away with nothing. Actually, less than nothing. After the bank took the proceeds, he would still owe taxes. "Fresh start," Caleb muttered, his voice raspy. "I'm 32 years old, Lisa. I have $400 in my pocket and no job. I'm moving back in with my parents in Ohio tomorrow." "Ohio is nice," Lisa chirped, ignoring the despair radiating off him. Low cost of living. Caleb closed his eyes. He pictured his mother's face when he told her. He pictured the twin bed in his childhood room. The shame was a bile rising in his throat. He had been the golden boy, the one who made it big, the one who left Sarah behind because she wasn't ambitious enough. Sarah. He thought about her constantly now, not with love, but with a confused, gnawing obsession. He had seen the articles. The Phoenix Trust announces new green energy initiative. Mystery heiress reshapes Chicago philanthropy. Her name wasn't always mentioned, but he knew. He felt her presence in the city like a shift in the barometric pressure. "They're here," Lisa squealed, looking out the window. "Oh wow, that's a car." Caleb didn't get up. "Is it the investment group, New Horizon Properties?" "Yeah, but look at the ride." Caleb dragged himself to his feet and walked to the bay window. His breath hitched. Idling in the driveway, right where his Audi used to sit, was a Rolls-Royce Phantom. It was jet black, sleek and imposing, looking like a tank designed for a billionaire. "Investment group?" Caleb frowned. Since when do property flippers drive Phantoms? The driver's door opened. A man in a uniform stepped out, not a generic chauffeur, but a man who moved with the precision of private security. He walked to the rear passenger door and opened it. The first thing Caleb saw was the shoe. A red-soled stiletto hit the cracked pavement of his driveway. It was followed by a long, shapely leg clad in sheer black hose. Then, a coat of midnight blue cashmere that looked softer than a cloud. The woman stepped out. She paused, adjusting her leather gloves, and looked up at the house. Lisa gasped. Isn't that? Caleb felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him dizzy, the world tilted on its axis. It was Sarah, but it wasn't the Sarah he had divorced. That Sarah had worn oversized cardigans and looked perpetually tired. This woman was a monolith. Her hair was cut in a sharp, dangerous bob. Her makeup was flawless, accentuating eyes that looked colder than the Chicago wind. She radiated a kind of power that made the air around her seem to vibrate. "No," Caleb whispered. "No, no, no, Mr. Reynolds," Lisa asked, concerned. "You look like you're going to faint." "That's my ex-wife," Caleb choked out. Sarah began walking up the path. She didn't look at the overgrown bushes Caleb had neglected. She didn't look at the peeling paint on the porch railing. She looked straight through the window, locking eyes with him across the empty room. The front door opened. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of expensive perfumes, sandalwood and jasmine. Sarah stepped into the foyer. Her heels clicked loudly on the hardwood floor, the floor she had once scrubbed on her hands and knees because Caleb didn't want to pay for a cleaning service. Two men in suits followed her in, carrying briefcases. They stood by the door like sentinels. "Good afternoon," Sarah said. Her voice was smooth, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. Lisa, ever the professional, stepped forward, hand extended. "Ms. Jenkins?" "I'm Lisa, the listing agent." "We are so honored." Sarah didn't shake her hand. She just nodded, a microscopic movement. "Lisa, you can wait in the kitchen with my associates. I'd like a moment with the seller." "Of course, absolutely." Lisa practically bowed and scurried away, signaling the lawyers to follow her. The silence that stretched between Caleb and Sarah was heavy, suffocating. Caleb stood by the fireplace, his hands trembling. He shoved them into his coat pockets to hide the shaking. "You," Caleb finally managed to say. "Your New Horizon Properties, a shell company," Sarah said, walking slowly around the room. She ran a gloved finger along the wall. "I have several. It helps keep the pests away." "Why?" Caleb's voice cracked. "Why are you doing this? You have—" "God, Sarah, I heard the rumors. You have hundreds of millions. Why do you want this dump? Why do you want my house?" Sarah stopped. She turned to him, her expression one of mild amusement. "Your house," she repeated softly. "Caleb, you forget. I picked out this house. I painted these walls. I planted the hydrangeas out back, the ones you let die. This was never your house. It was our home, and you turned it into a prison. So what? You're buying it to move back in?" Caleb sneered, trying to summon some of his old bravado. "It's going to relive the glory days." Sarah laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. "Oh, God, no. I have a penthouse on the Gold Coast. I wouldn't live in Scarsdale if you paid me." "Then why?" "Because I can," she said simply. "And because I have plans for the land. I'm bulldozing it." Caleb blinked. "What? Bulldozing it?" Sarah repeated, enunciating the word clearly. "I'm leveling the structure. I'm donating the land to the city. It's going to be a community garden, a place where things actually grow, unlike this marriage." Caleb felt his knees give out. He slumped against the wall. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She was buying the symbol of his victory just to erase it from the earth. "You're a monster," he whispered. "I'm a mirror, Caleb," she shot back, her voice suddenly sharp as a whip. "I'm showing you exactly who you are. You spent 10 years making me feel small. You told me I was a burden. You told me I was dead weight. You stripped me of my confidence, my career, my joy. And when you finally discarded me, you celebrated." She took a step closer, invading his space. "I saw the photos, Caleb. Jessica posted them. Champagne on the yacht. Freedom. You were toasting to my destruction while I was sitting in a studio apartment eating instant noodles." I didn't know," Caleb stammered. "You didn't care," Sarah shouted. It was the first time she had raised her voice, and it echoed off the empty walls like a gunshot. "That is the difference. You didn't care if I lived or died, as long as you got to keep the Audi." She reached into her purse, a Birkin bag that cost more than Caleb's annual salary had been, and pulled out a manila envelope. "But here is the best part," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The part that keeps me warm at night." She handed him the envelope. Caleb took it with shaking hands. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was a high-resolution scan of a FedEx delivery slip. He frowned, confused. "What is this?" "Look at the date," Sarah commanded. "Look at the timestamp." Caleb squinted. "November 14th, 4:15 p.m. "That was the day the divorce was finalized," Caleb said slowly. "So what? Where were you at 4:15 p.m. on November 14th? Sarah asked. Caleb's mind raced. That was the day. He had come home from the lawyer's office. He was packing for St. Bart's. Jessica was there. They were drinking. "I was here," he whispered. "I was home." "Yes," Sarah said. "My lawyers pulled the GPS data from the delivery truck and the security logs from your smart doorbell system, which, by the way, was still linked to my email for notifications." She pointed a manicured nail at the photo. "The driver rang the bell. He knocked. He had a package for me, a signature-required package from the estate of Archibald Sterling." Caleb looked up, his eyes wide with horror. "The driver waited 3 minutes," Sarah continued relentlessly. "You were inside. You probably saw him on the camera. You ignored him. Maybe you thought it was junk mail. Maybe you were too busy with your mistress to walk 20 feet to the door." Caleb's breath came in short, shallow gasps. He remembered. He remembered looking at the phone. "Just a delivery guy," he had told Jessica. "I'll deal with it later." "If you had opened the door," Sarah said, leaning in close, her eyes burning into his, "you would have signed for that package. You would have seen the return address. Blackwood and Thorne, attorneys at law. You might have opened it. You might have seen that your ex-wife had just inherited $480 million. Caleb made a sound like a wounded animal. The divorce decree was signed, Caleb, but the assets hadn't been distributed. If you had known about the inheritance that afternoon, you could have filed an emergency motion. You could have claimed it was marital property because the death occurred during the marriage. You could have tied me up in court for years. You could have walked away with half. $240 million. He had ignored the doorbell. He had ignored the doorbell to drink champagne with a girl who dumped him 3 weeks later. Caleb dropped the photo. He felt physically sick, a nausea so violent he thought he might vomit right there on the floor. "It wasn't bad luck, Caleb," Sarah said, stepping back, looking at him with profound pity. "It was you, your arrogance, your laziness, your total lack of common courtesy. You thought you were too good to answer the door, and that arrogance cost you $250 million. Caleb slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. He put his head in his hands. "Please," he wept. The fight was gone. He was broken. "Sarah, please. I have nothing. I'm moving back to Ohio. I have debt. Just help me. Alone. 50,000, 10,000, anything. Please." Sarah looked down at the man who had once held her heart in his hands and crushed it. She looked at his stained coat, his grey skin, his shaking hands. For a moment, silence filled the room. "The Sarah you are asking for is gone," she said softly. "You killed her, Caleb. You starved her of love until she died, and I'm the one who buried her." She turned on her heel and walked toward the door. "The bulldozers arrive at 1 p.m., she called out, not looking back. "The crew is very punctual. I suggest you leave before they start tearing the roof down." "Sarah!" Caleb screamed, scrambling to his knees. She didn't stop. She walked out the door, down the steps, and into the back of the Phantom. Caleb scrambled to the window. He watched the car pull away, gliding silently down the street, disappearing into the grey afternoon. He was alone. He looked around the empty room. He could hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the window frames. In the distance, he heard the low mechanical rumble of heavy machinery approaching. The bulldozers were coming. Caleb Reynolds closed his eyes and listened to the sound of his world ending. And that, my friends, is the brutal, terrifying truth about karma. Caleb Reynolds didn't just lose his money, he lost his future, and he did it to himself. He thought he was celebrating a victory, but he was actually celebrating the moment he threw away a winning lottery ticket. It's a harsh lesson. Arrogance makes you blind. Caleb was so busy looking down on Sarah that he missed the fortune standing right at his front door. He treated people like they were disposable, and in the end, he was the one who got thrown out with the trash. What do you think? Was Sarah's revenge too cruel? Should she have given him a second chance, or did Caleb get exactly what he deserved for the years of mistreatment? I really want to know your thoughts. Drop a comment below. I read and heart as many as I can. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm find more people who need to hear this. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. We have a crazy story coming up next week about a cheating bride who forgot to turn off her microphone. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.